All right, it is 2 past the hour, so let's get it started. Based on wherever you are, good morning, afternoon, or evening, everyone, and welcome to the webinar on Appficiency's Itemless Revolution. My name is Cheyenne, and I'll be your host for the rest of this event. Today, we'll be discussing how the Appficiency for Construction suite of NetSuite modules will help you alleviate major pain points for your construction clients and ultimately help you sell more NetSuite to construction. We have an awesome information-packed session planned for you today, but before we start, a few housekeeping items. Just going to share my screen. The webinar is going to be roughly 15 minutes, including the introduction and Q&A sections. We're going to go through Appficiency's background, our software products, the itemless data model. We'll give you a demo and as well talk about our upcoming innovations. But on the housekeeping side, we'd love to hear from you. So please feel free to use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to communicate with us. And as well, we have a few polls prepared for you to get to know your thoughts and feedback throughout the session. So as you know, joining us today are Johnny Fan, our CEO and co-founder, and Eric Ribeiro, our solutions architect. So Johnny brings over 30 years of software, SaaS, project management, and IT experience in the enterprise software realm, and he founded the company after almost a decade of top performances NetSuite. And also Eric comes with over 8 years of experience in NetSuite and workforce management and plays a key role at Appficiency as a solutions architect. Lastly, as I mentioned, I'll be your host today, and I'm also the marketing lead for the solutions for the software division. So without further ado, I will pass it over to Johnny to go over the business and our software solutions.
Thank you so much, Cheyenne. It's a pleasure to talk to a bunch of tech heads like myself and Eric. We look forward to giving you some good, deep content as we go through this. But first, not everyone knows actually our profile anymore. We've grown, we've changed a little bit, and so I think it's worth a quick review. One of the things that Appficiency has always been well known for is actually breaking down industry barriers. We did it. I did it when I was at NetSuite, and now we're doing it as a company. It's part of our mission to create new markets for NetSuite customers to buy into, sell, and of course, really enjoy the product through that. We are 160 plus global team members now all over the world, and we've consistently won awards in the construction space, in the services space, in the CPG, and as well in the team sports space. So it's our pleasure today to have a chance to talk to you about what the Itemless Revolution really is and why the Appficiency story is going to help drive it home. So as one of the top alliance partners, I think we learned early on that we can't solve these things all on our own. And so just because you're in the NetSuite ecosystem and you're living on NetSuite, it doesn't mean that the entire solution of what you need to do is only in NetSuite. And so sometimes, and it's common in certain construction sub-verticals to have field services involved, to have other types of applications involved, time entry, payroll, so on and so forth. And so what we promise you is that inside NetSuite, the data model supports the entire connected universe, knowing that somebody who has a field service application, maybe they have Procore, maybe they have Primavera, maybe they have just Next Technic. It could be any of those things. And they might also have a material processing solution if they're a fabricator. They might have payroll and union payroll. So all of these things are things that we really try to include into the data model so that integrations are easy, the data flow through makes sense, and the story makes sense for all involved parties. And so this particular concept is what we call our Delivery 2.0 concept, and we focus on the taxonomy and the procedures of the entire business segment. If you look at our customer base, we've worked across a wide variety of customers. Many of these now, almost half of them, are starting to become construction customers. And there are many types of construction customers, which is why you need this Itemless Revolution, and Eric's going to really go into that later. But you'll see that the types of customers include land developers, general contractors, specialty contractors, and fabricators that are very much like manufacturing job shops. So you do have a wide range of requirements across that set. And what we're trying to do, and what we've done successfully now 3 years later, is we've built this data model that supports all three of them in a cohesive, logical way. So we're going to go into one of the customer experience examples. This is a particular customer that does electrical contracting and maintenance. They'll set up power lines and do majority of the electrical work when cities do suburban regional improvements on the infrastructure, when they set up brand new infrastructure, etc. They used our job costing solution, which we call the Appficiency For Construction job costing solution. And that allowed them to budget with precision across their projects. It allowed them to budget against their original estimate, including all change orders, be able to separate what was change order from original budget, et cetera, and also look at the future forecast. What's their EAC, their estimate at completion? What's their construction WIP? For a lot of these types of companies, they look at WIP as their general deferred balance, like a software company would look at, that's their future revenue. And a lot of construction companies will look at it that way as well. They were able to take our job costing product, our AIA billing product, which allows the submission to the general contractors and allows submission to the city for proper pay application against detailed activities, which they call work codes on the project. Great example of this is a company that's over 100 years old, and they came off of what was considered to be an industry leading application at the time foundation into our NetSuite and Appficiency Job Costing total solution for construction, which is really the intent here to change what the industry can do on NetSuite. And so what you see today, especially across our customer base where they're using our software, you're seeing a whole set of construction companies like, oh, I can do it this way, and I get all these other benefits. I get real-time reports, I get dashboards inside my project. I'm able to see the detailed accounting details, and I can still connect to my favorite applications that either run the field or run my payroll or run some other part of the business. So I'm going to pass it over to Eric now to really give you guys the broad sense of what we built, why it's built the way it is, and you're going to see how Eric is able to really give you that deep technical understanding of what you need so that you guys can go, when you go to markets in your sales cycles, when you go to market with your potential prospects that are fit in any of these categories, you're going to at least have an intelligent talk track and be able to understand when they say we don't know what we buy up front, you'll understand what they mean and be able to check that box and say, that's no problem. We're used to that. And so let me show you how we can help you do that when you buy NetSuite. So I'll pass over to Eric now.
Awesome. Thank you, Johnny. Yeah, and I think I just want to reiterate kind of that last point that Johnny made is, this is just one session of a future deck of sessions that we'll have with the greater NetSuite team, right? And so the team will then understand, what type of opportunities our solution really aligns with. And so, we market it as construction solution, but it really fits into a broader market that includes not only construction, so your typical general contractors, land developers, specialty contractors, but also construction-like industries as well. So fabricators, designers, light manufacturers. Johnny brought up a great customer story around, a 100-year-old company that focuses on, infrastructure. We have customers that span a wide variety of industries. One customer, they actually build robots for, DreamWorks and Sony Productions, right? And it really just revolves around companies that have really four main phases of their overall project. That's the design, that's the build, that's the install, and the service and maintenance. And there are certain areas that NetSuite does really well when we're managing the, say, technical requirements of those different phases. And really our data model is meant to not only fit into overall NetSuite, but also other solutions that they may be using to ultimately streamline their business operations and their business financials and accounting. And so when we talk about our solution, our construction solution, there's really four main products. Next slide, please. Yep. And so really, as we talk about, that customer experience and applying that experience, we have really found opportunities where NetSuite isn't necessarily the perfect fit out of the box. And so through the years, we have found those opportunities to fill gaps and make NetSuite a better fit for companies in the construction and construction-like industries. And that's really where our efficiency solutions were born from. And so today we've got a set of solutions that is really focused on the quote unquote construction industry. We're going to talk a little bit more about what I mean by that throughout our webinar series that we have planned over the next several months. But today I really wanted to give you all some clarity around what our solution is made up of and discuss more specifically our Itemless Revolution and the impact that has on the NetSuite data model. But before we actually get into that, though, for those that are familiar with our solutions, this may just be a quick refresher. And for those that haven't seen it, I'd like to give you all at least some perspective on what the Appficiency construction solution is comprised of and where it fits in. And so from a high level, when we say construction solution, there are really 4 key modules, and it applies to more than what we normally think of in construction. We call it construction solution, but it really applies to those companies, as I mentioned earlier, that build some type of widget or thing. And typically you'll have companies that manage one, multiple, or all phases of a project, right? And so those phases, like I mentioned earlier, the design phase, the build, the install, and then eventually the service and maintenance of those widgets or things that they're building. So regardless of that widget or thing, whether it's a house, whether it's a robot, they often have a set of requirements, not only from a system perspective, but also from a budgeting, billing, and job costing standpoint. And so our solutions, they really support many of these requirements. And more often than not, one of the more critical requirements is job costing, right? They need to know at the end of the day, are they profitable or are they not on a given project? And so within our construction solution, we have A4C Job Costing. For those who have been working with Appficiency in the past, that was formerly known as material job costing, which basically allows project managers and end users to track project metrics and project profitability and give them accurate budget versus actual cost tracking, really down to raindrops in a bucket, Johnny likes to say, right? So it allows them to track more than just labor costs, which is, I think, what we're more traditionally familiar with when it comes to what capabilities NetSuite has out of the box. It really allows them to track all the industry standard cost types, like material, like equipment, subcontractor overheads, etc. And then the second piece to that job costing module is the A4C Project Dashboard. And this is really a visualization tool that's been highly requested. And we now have a solution that gives users an easy visualization of their project data. So we're all familiar with the reporting capabilities that comes out of the box with NetSuite that we certainly leverage as part of our solution. So Save Searches, Suite Analytics, but we've taken it a step further. And what's great is as users transact in NetSuite, these dashboards automatically going to update with that latest project data. And it's built directly into the project record. So as a project manager, they can go in, see cost trends, see how that project is progressing over time, and have different metrics that they can then use as golden standards to see how that project is ultimately moving forward through that project lifecycle. So they don't have to export data to Excel or create charts and graphs in Excel. They have the ability to visualize their project data within NetSuite in real time. And then we also have a progress billing solution where this is essentially percent complete project progress billing. So some may refer to it as schedule of values, but essentially it's the ability to bill on a periodic basis based on the percentage of work completed. So this is very common in the construction industry. And on the same note, oftentimes there are requirements for AIA similarly formatted reports, which our solution helps address, which Johnny mentioned earlier, right? So typically, if you're dealing with general contractors or especially these big commercial contractors, there are payment applications that you ultimately have to submit. And so our solution actually supports those requirements where we have similarly formatted AIA reports, so your G702s and G703s that you would then attach to invoices. And so some keywords to listen out to, especially when you're talking to your prospects or are in the midst of a deal cycle, is again, schedule of values, progress billing, G702, G703 forms. So if you ever hear those terms, it means they have specific requirements that impacts how they bill and oftentimes how they recognize revenue, which our solution supports as well. Right, so that is all built into our Progress Billing solution. And then we have our estimate to project solution, which we refer to as ProSync. And this is more of the upstream activities which involve estimating and budget management. It also includes capabilities like change order management and really helps drive the translation of that estimate to a project in NetSuite and really acts as that budget moving forward for that project. And so we'll see more on that, in future webinars. And then finally, we have our retainage solution. And so our retainage solution supports both AR and AP retainage, where not only does it automatically deduct or withhold a percentage of an invoice or vendor bill, but it also handles the downstream accounting treatment of those amounts as well. In the construction industry, retainage is very, very common across multiple different types of companies. So whether you're a GC or you're a specialty contractor, usually there's always a requirement around retainage. And there are definitely ways to do it manually in NetSuite, but with our solution, we're able to automatically account for those withheld amounts and then also handle the accounting treatment of those amounts as well. And so when we talk about our whole construction solution, those are the 4 to 5 key elements that that encompasses that solution. And then one thing I'll call out though is not everybody needs everything. And so these modules can be deployed, say as a whole, or can be deployed individually. And so that really depends on the particular scope and what a client's requirements are from a solutioning perspective. And so as you all get familiar with our solutions and as we work together on deal cycles, right, you can start to kind of pinpoint exactly what solutions or modules they'll need as part of the phase 1 or a phase 2, but know that you don't have to sell the whole suite, so to speak. These solutions can be deployed individually as well. And so I'll tell you from my experience, I'd say job costing is a part of, say, 95%, if not more, of the clients that I've worked with, right? Usually that is the meat and potatoes of the solution. Companies want to know from a job costing perspective, right? Are they profitable? Are they not? So in future discussions, we'll be, covering the 4 modules in more detail. That way you all can see what use cases our solution solves for, what types of opportunities to bring us into, and know when to bring us in as well. And also make yourself more aware on, key terms or words to listen out for, which would then indicate, hey, maybe we need to bring Appficiency into these deal cycles. And so for today's discussion, we're talking about the Itemless Revolution. So I'm sure many of you are asking, what is it? Why does it matter? And how does it change our approach to solutioning? And so as all of you, I'm sure, already know, NetSuite transactions can't function without an item. You just simply can't create a transaction without an item, right? So NetSuite always needs 3 things for a transaction. It needs an entity, it needs an item, and it needs the actual transaction record. So the issue with items when we're thinking in terms of construction and construction-like businesses is there's no hierarchical structure of items to aggregate costs and revenue inputs. And so as a result, what we've seen to make NetSuite fit these sorts of industries is they'll create an extensive item list, sometimes thousands and thousands of items to accommodate a client's requirements around job costing, around budgeting, and around billing. So not only is this resource intensive, but it's also not scalable. And Johnny made a great point earlier on is that data model, when you're using an extensive item list, can also impact other integration points with other systems. So when we think about a solution that's not only taking into account, the transactions that are happening in NetSuite, but also transactions that are happening outside the system and how that also flows into the project itself. With an item list breakdown or data model, it's not a great way to ultimately connect the dots and the pieces of the overall solution. And so for those familiar with the construction industry, many companies follow the CSI code standard, right? So essentially the CSI code standard, for those not familiar, it essentially provides a format to organize certain construction specs into different divisions. So for example, I think Division 2 is concrete, Division 3 is masonry, I think Division 4 is like wood, plastic. And so if you're a concrete contractor working on a project, you'd use these codes to bid, to budget, and then bill your clients. They're not using items because more often than not, as a designer or as a builder, you don't know what parts or materials you're going to use or what suppliers you're going to purchase from, right? What you do know are the activities you're going to perform and how much budget you're going to allocate to those different activities and to the different cost types. So that's what our efficiency solution data model and architecture supports. It gives companies the ability to use work codes and cost types to organize, aggregate, and capture cost and different revenue inputs. And so it gives them the ability to create those parent-child relationships with those work codes for simple or really complex budgeting and billing requirements. Right. So at the end of the day, NetSuite still needs to use an item on a transaction record. So I don't want to mistake that, right? But what our solution does is it removes the requirement to use specific items for each piece of work, whether that be service or material or whatever else it might be. Right. So for example, we have a customer who does commercial flooring. They have over, I believe it's something over 1,000 flooring options or SKUs. So instead of having an item list of over 1,000 items, they're using something like 6 or 8 generic items. So they have a generic item for, say, vinyl flooring, one for hardwood, one for tile. They don't have an item for each flooring SKU because the item really doesn't have much significance. All right. Well, I'll take a pause there. I'm sure there'll be questions throughout kind of the presentation here. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to transition over into a high-level demo of our Itemless Revolution. And so please, as you have questions, right, you'll see some polls pop up as well. Please enter your questions into the chat. We have Johnny Than. He's going to be managing the chat. So for those not familiar with Johnny, he's very, very much a NetSuite guru. So as you ask your questions, Johnny will be responding. But with that, I'll jump into the demonstration and showcase our efficiency data model and architecture here. Right. So I'll wait for the poll to complete here. Perfect. All right, so this is a good segue. And so as you all can see, right, I'm in NetSuite. So what we'll do is we'll walk through a couple examples of what estimates can look like and what the Itemless Revolution actually looks like in practice. And so what I'm about to walk through next is a few different estimates that shows different use cases and how we approach the Itemless data model. And so there's 3 ways companies in the construction space or construction-like space will do their estimating. And so we refer to those internally as 1D, 2D, and 3D estimating. And the thing I want to emphasize here before we actually get into it, though, is you'll always have a work code in a 1D, in a 2D, and a 3D. And so why is that? It's because from a reporting standpoint, the work code is always the lowest common denominator to aggregate and track costs and billable amounts, right? So it's a way to aggregate costs and revenues, regardless of what type of project it is, what customer it's for, what items are used on a project. With work codes, you're able to categorize your different estimated costs and your different estimated billing or revenue inputs, which gets into why you don't need specific items when estimating, right? So here's an example of a 1D estimate. These are typically the least specific. It means the estimate doesn't really tell you what it's going to do. Now, what's special about a 1D estimate? The item is completely generic and it isn't descriptive necessarily to the industry. It literally has nothing to do with anything except maybe providing, say, a billing schedule, as you can see in this case, right? What matters is that work code. So this is a 1D estimate because only the work code is filled out where I can track and capture those total revenue and total cost amounts on a work code or activity level. Right, so I want to show you all this version first because you can start really as vague as this estimate here and then get very specific. So if we think of like a house or anyone who's been through like a major renovation or remodel, right, that house typically is going to start off with full walls and a roof, really nothing else, right? In the construction world, what's very special about it in general is the item kind of fades into nothingness, and the only really thing you have on the transaction is the work code or different activities that have any real definition. The item really is just a placeholder for later. So it allows you to do these other numbers, so these costs and these billable amounts, which then translate onto the project as your budget. And so the item isn't relevant yet, and that's normal. And so in a lot of construction, they don't fully know what's going to be included in the end result. And a great example of that is if you've ever been through that major renovation, you'll work with your contractor, and what they'll do is they'll set aside a portion of the budget to specific areas of the project. And so in this case, we'll say work code 01000 is specifically around wire duct and tray cables, right? They'll say we've budgeted X amount for fixtures, Y amount for doors, Z amount for lighting. So they know they're going to budget, say, in this house example, every window in a house for, say, $500. And they know they have 30 windows to buy, but they don't know which supplier they're going to get it from, and they don't know what part number it's going to be. But they still need to move forward with the budget, and they still need to move forward with the project because the windows come much, much later. So, what they will do is on some PO or on some vendor bill, it will tell them months and months later that, oh, okay, this was the actual SKU, and oh, each window wasn't $500, it was $400 per window. So that's why it's important to still track those budgeted and revenue inputs at the work code level and not by the item, because the item is still what we like to say TBD, right? It's still to be determined, especially at the beginning stage of those projects. So this is an example of a 1D estimate, the least specific of them all, where the item really doesn't hold any sort of significance at all. It's the least specific. And then we have our 2D estimates. And so with the 2D estimate, you'll see there's some slight variation here. What we see, especially with specialty trades like electricians, plumbers, HVAC contractors, you'll see the concept of a cost type. Internally, we refer to that as a smell category. It's really just an easy way to remember. So it really just stands for your subcontractors, your materials, your equipment, and your labor, right? So those are the kind of four main cost types that you typically see in construction. But with these 2D estimates, the most relevant cost type is oftentimes labor, and it's often material as well. So what you have in a 2D is you have role type items, right? And so in this scenario, you may have foreman labor, you may have journeymen, right? You may have master electricians, master plumbers, right? And so they'll budget for specific types of labor that is needed on a job. And then they may get somewhat specific or semi-specific about what type of material they'll be needed on a job. But similar to the 1D, the item really isn't as important because the aggregation of costs always happens at the work code level, right? What's different here is they more often like to break down those work codes by also cost types as well, right? And what you can start to envision here is you can start to break down your work codes by your different cost types. And so as an example here, right, I may have 9CA04 as a work code, but then I may have not only material, but I may have labor included in that work code as well. And so you get very much more specific and can break down that structure of that work code into your different cost types, right? And so that helps you better understand, the amount of costs and revenues allocated to each cost type, like that labor, like that material, subcontractor, and equipment. And then the last estimate that I want to showcase here for you all is the 3D. And so with the 3D estimate, this is generally very, very specific. So not only is it role specific, but it's also part specific. And so what it's telling you is the actual parts that you're going to have included in this project. So parts that you're going to bill for, and also the specific labor roles, right? So of course, in a 3D estimate, you might actually end up having a 3D that is part specific and a 3D that is role specific for the labor side. So in this example, right, I have kitty cubicle, I have a wall panel as well, and then some foreman and journeyman labor. So they'll name the part and they'll name the labor role type. And so that's a 3D estimate where the work code and the cost type, right? And also that items are generally known at the time of budgeting or at the time of estimating. Now, kind of all together, these different estimate examples, they really start to become the seed for all that other estimate activity. It really becomes the baseline or that initial budget in that initial contract when they start that project. So it's important to understand that the three most important elements on the estimate are always going to be that work code, because that's the lowest common denominator, and then being able to track your different billing and revenue amounts, and also your different cost inputs at the work code level. Right. So kind of quickly as a recap, regardless of what estimate is used, really important elements of the estimate is that you can capture that cost and revenue input at the work code level, that lowest common denominator. And why is that important? It's because you might have multiple different people working on the same work code. So whether it's a journeyman, whether it's a foreman, whether it's a project manager, so on and so forth, you may be using different types of equipment, working with a variety of different material and subcontractors. All those respective costs and revenues need to be tracked against the work code for job costing, for billing, because that's the common thread between them, right? The work code is what strings everything together. Without the work code, it really becomes nearly impossible to create relationships between your different cost types, right? It becomes nearly impossible to categorize your items if you do use specific items and track your cost inputs from a job cost perspective. And so from a solution perspective, right, all of this culminates into what the output is from a solution perspective, right? So there's a variety of reports that we support as well that feed into this data model. One of those that you'll see is we provide a work code PDF, right? And what you'll typically see is, again, depending on the presentation, whether this is more for internal stakeholders or external stakeholders, we can see the aggregation of these different costs and revenues. And this is an example of a revenue roll-up by work code, right? So we can see easily what the aggregation of those revenue billable amounts are for that specific work code, right? So you could attach this to an invoice or to that contract and send this, say, to a GC or to a subcontractor, right? So all of this ultimately feeds throughout the entire solution, whether it's touching more of the upstream activities with estimating and contracting, or when we think about more from a job costing perspective and how this ultimately also feeds into our progress billing capabilities as well. So with that, I'll pass it back over to Johnny, and he can actually talk to a couple recent innovations that we're going to release or that have been released in the next couple months here.
Thanks so much, Eric. I appreciate it. For those that are joining late, we just covered off all of the Itemless Revolution. Eric did a bang-up job on the demonstration. Give you guys just a sense of what the initial front end looks like. As he mentioned, there's going to be a series of webinars where we're going to track through the entire process. You're going to get to see how we get to those beautiful graphs directly on the project record. One of our key upcoming innovations, though, is the next generation Procore integration. In the past, the Procore generation has primarily been done with the concept of items being used. And it's also been often tied to project tasks being in construction, being also NetSuite project tasks, which is actually the wrong work model to work with. The way tasks are created in construction are much more fluid, much more dynamic. And so our next-gen Procore integration takes into account all of that. It integrates directly to what Procore calls the prime contract. And then the prime contract is actually what sets up the schedule of values and has all the minor work codes and percent complete progress. And it also connects to the Procore vendor bill and PO side, which will allow your setup costs, or the cost that the field predicts, the estimator predicts, the foreman predicts, to flow through to NetSuite and be rationalized against the true hard financials that NetSuite's able to capture through its AP process. So that's really exciting. Look out for a separate webinar for that, and look out for some new pricing to come up with it. This is the first and only Procore integration that actually integrates to the Procore prime contract at the schedule of values level. So there's 3 or 4 out there already. None of them do this. This is the first one, and it's because now the data model inside NetSuite lives for that reception and for that proper interplay. Lastly, we have a job costing standard, what we really are calling basically think of it as a pre-built prefab, if you will. You can drop this job costing standard in. It's about 1/3 of the cost of our normal job costing product. It comes completely done out of the box. There's no config, nearly no config required. And it's primarily training and adoption based implementation hours that are applied to sort of the, getting this off the ground and set up for a customer. So look out for that. You're going to see a lot of news and data sheets, pricing sheets, et cetera, for that. We're super excited to have this. This is the first fully featured job costing concept in a prefab concept being offered, and it's going to be offered worldwide ultimately. But we're starting in North America, and like I said, the price point is going to be amazing for this particular time. I know the economy is not in the strongest shape, and so job costing standards should be a very welcome addition to a opening price point product. Thanks, Cheyenne. I'll turn it back to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Johnny. And what a great presentation, both Johnny and Eric. Thank you. Awesome. So moving on just to a few closing points, there's going to be a very quick survey upon exit from the webinar. So it's just going to launch in your browser. We'd love to hear your opinion about this session and what you'd like to see in the future ones. And definitely keep an eye out for the webinar recording and as well the link to invite for the other sessions. Lastly, if you have any inquiries or would like to have any client conversations, please reach out to softwaresales@appficiencyinc.com. Any needs you may have, be it connecting you with sales, marketing, or even technical support, will be there to support you. And with that, this is the end of our webinar.